All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is GeoDC's 120 whatever meetup. The theme tonight is open data, open communities, and open standards in roughly that order. Or actually, I think Nadine would disagree and say it goes the other way. Open standards come first, right? So at any rate, we have two fantastic presenters tonight. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our two presenters who are volunteering their time and are going to tell us more about the work that they're doing. And I will allow them to introduce themselves so as not to steal any thunder. All right, so next and final presenter, last but not least, as it were, is Maggie Cawley from OpenStreetMap US. And as with Nadine, I will not steal Maggie's thunder and let her introduce herself. So Maggie, would you like to go ahead?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight, all the way from Little Richmond, Virginia. My name is Maggie Cawley, and I'm here to talk about OpenStreetMap and the organization that I serve, OpenStreetMap US. I do have a little ditty of a presentation here for you, so I'm just going to talk through as I share my screen and hopefully don't mess this up. A little bit about myself. My background is in urban planning and GIS. For a long time, I was a GIS consultant, working to spread open data and open source GIS around the world. So helping people learn about how to use open data, how to contribute to OpenStreetMap and other open data sources, and got to work on quite a number of really fun projects. Now I'm the executive director of OpenStreetMap US, and I think to really understand what that means, I'll start with talking about what is OpenStreetMap. I can't see all of your hands, and normally if we were in the room, I'd ask you all to raise your hands high if you've heard of OpenStreetMap, and I really hope that all of your hands are raised. So if you're one of the few in the room that have not heard of OpenStreetMap, I hope there's only a few of you. It is a collaborative global project to create a free editable world map. So every park bench, every tree, every street, every road name, and every building mapped around the world. It was founded in 2004, a little bit of a history lesson. It was founded in the UK by a man named Steve Coast. The Crown had copyright on geospatial data in the UK at the time, and there was little or no public domain data. So Steve hired some couriers to drive around the city and started uploading those GPS traces to a site on the World Wide Web. That's the map on the left. On the right, you'll see a more colorful map, and that's a map of the first mapping party. Now we can say mapathons on the Isle of Wight. So all of those different colors represent a different mapper. So I feel nostalgic, even though I wasn't there. It's fun.
It's a lovely little place, Maggie, on the south coast of England. It's beautiful. It's tiny.
And now it's mapped. So that's the backstory of OpenStreetMap. The goal really was to create a free, publicly available database of geospatial data. Steve handed the domain over to and created the OpenStreetMap Foundation, who now holds the copyrights and is the custodian for the computer servers. It's a global foundation. It's run by fewer than 3 full-time employees and a 7-member board of directors. They are UK registered and have local chapters all over the world, of which OpenStreetMap US is one. I don't want to confuse you too much, but I feel like I had to mention the foundation. It is the legal entity for OpenStreetMap. So this is a chart that shows the growth. I think by now we have scaled beyond Steve's wildest dreams. This chart is all the registered users only up until last year. So millions of people have registered for OpenStreetMap accounts and thousands map every week. I show this slide not to say that one map is better than the other, but just to really show you all where OpenStreetMap shines in the details. You can really be as detailed as you want to be in OpenStreetMap. And you can see the Kennedy Space Center mapped in even more detail on the left and on the bottom in these screenshots. Here's the Cape Canaveral. You can see all those launch complexes and buildings are mapped in OpenStreetMap, and they are missing on the other map. So if you're familiar with an area or a place, you are free to add as much detail as you want down to, I said, the tree or the shrubbery or the park bench. So who is adding all of these data? I'd say you name it and they're probably involved. Humanitarian groups, local and regional communities, local and federal governments, mappers, developers, corporations. The map is made by people, not to sound corny, but like you and me, all over the world. And because the data is free and open, they can use those data for whatever they want. It's unrestricted, which breeds innovation. So if you think about OpenStreetMap data, it finds its way into any number of applications. Here's just a small list of folks involved in the project in some way, shape, or form, either as data users using OpenStreetMap as their base map or contributing for their networks for rideshare, for example, like the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. Not only are corporations using the data, they have also become some key contributors to the project. You can see over the last 3 years, corporate contributions have skyrocketed, and it's become really core as a project to a lot of these businesses and the way that they work. Last year, there's a partnership between, I'll just go through a few of these. I'm not endorsing any of these companies, just kind of sharing a few of the things that are cooking in the community. Facebook, Microsoft, and Esri partnered to create this Map with AI project. So helping to bring these OSM ready data sets into OpenStreetMap using this fork of the ID editor called Rapid. And this is helping governments bring their data into OpenStreetMap. Here's a screenshot of the tool. So Rapid prompts the human mapper to verify the data features. In this case, I chose a local-ish example. The city of Alexandria, Virginia has shared their address database, and the human mapper is going to help to add that into OpenStreetMap. You can edit OpenStreetMap in ArcGIS. They have created a pretty user-friendly interface. This is an old screenshot. I'm sure it's been updated. Forgive me, but that's there. And you can also open it in it is a base map in ArcGIS as well. Strava, if anyone's a runner or biker out there, they switched to OSM in 2015. And if you like to map in GeoDC, you can actually download that heat map and use this to trace and edit in OpenStreetMap. Niantic switched to OpenStreetMap. This is from 2017. So if anybody plays Pokemon Go, or what's the new one? Harry Potter, I think is a game. Those games use OpenStreetMap. Amazon uses OpenStreetMap to help deliver all your stuff. And some of those drivers even contribute data. I won't talk too much about Amazon right now, but just another large user. So that brings me to OpenStreetMap US. We are a US-based 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded in 2010 by all volunteers, and for 9 years, this organization was run by an all-volunteer board and community. It's one of the first paid staff and pretty much only person working full-time right now for the nonprofit. We support OpenStreetMap in the US through a number of different avenues, through education, fostering awareness and advocacy for the project, not only for OpenStreetMap, but also for open data, ensuring availability of the data, and to me, the best part is the active community. We recently did some strategic planning and have developed a vision and some strategic priorities which hadn't existed for the organization previously, which I'm pretty excited about. So these are some things to guide us as we grow over the coming years and really start taking our vision not only to the OpenStreetMap community and project and what we're mapping, but how is this impacting the world around us, and how can we support other people's initiatives in all these different areas. Here's just a OSM US at a glance. So we focus on learning and outreach, leveraging volunteer time, connecting these communities across the US and globally, working with other chapters around the world to see how we can collaborate on, for example, convincing our local governments that OpenStreetMap is good enough. Here's a couple pictures of some events. We have started to do a lot more of our community engagement virtually. We hold Mappy hours usually twice per month. We have a speaker where we just get together to hang out and meet new mappers. Our next event will be on April 14th at 8 o'clock. The theme next week is education, and actually one of the attendees here will be speaking at that event, Stephen Johnson, and the theme will be education. So if you're interested, anybody is welcome. It's an hour, and it's usually a pretty good time. We are doing our next, we started doing larger virtual events in the fall. We had one called Connect 2020, and all of our talks are up on our YouTube. We had great turnout for our first virtual event, so we decided to do it again in May. And you can see on the right side, we actually used to get together in person, and this is in DC as well. We were known historically for our State of the Map US events. This was the main effort put together by that volunteer board and the community over the years. It took a lot of effort to put these events on, but they really are a great way for people to come together, come up with new ideas, and just build that community aspect and strengthen it. So I really look forward to our next State of the Map US when we can have it probably early next year. This is a picture from all of the people who were at State of the Map US in Minneapolis in 2019 for the first time. So you can see it's a pretty welcoming community, and we often get many new faces. We just started doing mapping campaigns. So this is kind of a new program area for us to start to bring ideas to the community about what they can map. In November, I wanted to call it No-November, but it was too dorky. We did this 30-day mapping challenge, and every day we would post, today we're gonna map bike racks, tomorrow we're gonna map sidewalk ramps. And seeing who would map the most, and we gave out a t-shirt. So those are kind of fun. And for 2021, we started this 12 months of OSM. So every month we're coming up with a theme and then tying that into our Mappy hours and trying to bring speakers in around that theme. Last month, we did a celebration of Women's History Month, and in one of those events, we created the Women Remembered Project. So this project is to improve the representation of women figures in OpenStreetMap, and hopefully in the US by cataloging, where streets are named after women, where there's statues, where there's pieces of art or art museums named after prominent women in the US, and begin to understand how well or underrepresented women are as far as being remembered in the US. So these are some of the things that are coming down the pike that I'm really excited to be working on. It's improving collaboration between local mapping groups and really getting people engaged in OpenStreetMap. We also have programs. One of our largest programs is TeachOSM, focusing on open mapping education. I'll go into more about TeachOSM in a minute. And we just started this, we just launched our charter project program. So our first charter project is going to be a project called Open Historical Map. And in this model, OpenStreetMap US is acting as an umbrella organization and kind of a fiscal sponsorship model to bring small projects in and give them an institutional home so that they can focus on what they're good at and we can handle the back end nitty gritty. So here's a few pictures of TeachOSM at work. Every year, well, at most years, TeachOSM is present at Geography 2050 conference and works with 50 AP Human Geography teacher fellows and teaches these teachers how to bring OpenStreetMap into their classrooms. So here you see pictures of teachers in the field with field papers collecting data in Queens, and then back in the classroom entering that data right back into OpenStreetMap. So over the years, TeachOSM has probably taught more than 500 teachers. Stephen, you can correct me in the chat. But really, by teaching those educators how to bring OpenStreetMap in the classroom, we're reaching thousands of students and teaching them those geospatial sorry, geospatial ideas and how to think spatially and start to understand their world on a map. Gosh, we're doing a lot these days. So the other thing we've started to do is create more committees. We have always had an event planning committee. So every State of the Map US has been planned by a local and community team. So the local community puts in a bid to have State of the Map US in their town, and they come up with a group of volunteers to help us throw that event. So it makes it really unique every time. The latest was Tucson, Arizona. They won the bid. So hopefully our next conference will be in Tucson and early next year. Volunteers have also started to help plan these virtual events, which has been going really well. So if anyone out there is interested in volunteering, it's a really nice group of people and a nice way to get involved besides mapping and OpenStreetMap. Last year, the government committee came together. We have about 40 members now from a lot of different federal agencies, USGS, DOT, FRA. People from these agencies are coming together to provide a forum for conversation and experimentation within OpenStreetMap and start to foster awareness of OpenStreetMap in their different agencies. We have a pilot project right now to map railroad tunnel data in OpenStreetMap. It's not happening yet, but the idea is that OpenStreetMap volunteers will collect that data and it will go to OpenStreetMap and also the FRA. So stay tuned. Hopefully at Fed Geo Day in June, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that project because it's very exciting. And we also last year put out our first code of conduct for all of our virtual spaces. We've always had one for our events, but we now have a code of conduct committee who revised and expanded that code of conduct and now responds to any complaints within our communication spaces. So this is a lot of stuff. How can you get involved if you're interested? Well, I mean, you could be doing this right now and just go to openstreetmap.org, create an account and start mapping your neighborhood. You could become a member. We are a member-based organization. Like I said, we're a nonprofit, so you can become a member of OpenStreetMap US. We have about almost 300 members now, and they vote for our board members every year. We have a Slack channel, so if you're interested in anything in particular with an OpenStreetMap, there's probably a channel for it. There's even a newbies channel if you're new to it. You can come to a virtual mappy hour. Like I said, the next one's next week. And weekly TeachOSM is doing mapping, like true mappy hours where they don't just talk about mapping, they map. So if you're interested in mapping alongside some other people, I would say join them. If you have a project that you'd like to share, please submit a talk for the upcoming Mapping USA event. We'd love to hear from you. Probably the 5-minute lightning talk would be perfect. And the other thing you can do is help us advocate. I mean, spread the word about OpenStreetMap. One of the things I think is that it's still kind of a well-kept secret, and I think we need to change that. Here's some additional resources of the things that I mentioned. We have a newsletter that goes out every month about what we're working on. All of our recordings of past State of the Map conferences, all the Mappy Hour presentations, and all the virtual events are on our YouTube. And if you want to learn about mapping, dive into that map features page. Our wiki is extensive. And I will stop there. Thank you very much for having me. Here's some contacts and handles and websites if you're interested in keeping in touch. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Maggie.
I threw a lot at you.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the 1 or 2 slides ago that how you can be involved, because I just realized I need to renew my membership. So I just got an email the other day, so I'm on it. But it's a great organization. So does anybody have any questions for Maggie?
I have a quick question. So OpenStreetMap was founded because in the UK, they didn't have open access to that data. But in the US, I mean, we have government agencies that generate lots and lots of mapping data. Is that data not as open here that we also need OpenStreetMap, or are there's different levels of data that are being gathered by OpenStreetMap?
That's a good question. So I think with OpenStreetMap, the thing, this might not answer your question, but the great thing about OpenStreetMap being a map of the world, right? It's all the same schema. So the road in Tahiti is going to be the same as a road in Tallahassee. So it's just a different kind of data set than you would get from the federal government. It also tends to be in some places more up to date. You can see an error in OpenStreetMap today and it'll be updated in 5 minutes. So I think there's, depending on what you're trying to do with the data, it's going to steer you towards different databases. In some places in the world, they don't have access to any data, right? And yes, in the US, we are pretty lucky to have all that public domain information, but the world would not be complete if the US data was not in there, right?
Yeah, and in the US too, we have, there's the federal government, there's 3,000, or there's 50 states, the DC, Puerto Rico, and 4 other island areas, 3,100 whatever counties, 40,000 or so local governments, and they're all doing things differently.
Oh yeah, that metadata is really hard to share. So I mean, imagine if we all shared our data in one place with the same schema, with the same.
Where could we do that?
I don't know. I can't.
Yeah, but Maggie, one of the things, and this is going to be in your panel at Fed Geo Day, is in the UK they had a problem that the government had the data and it was not open to the population and without certain monetary exchange, et cetera. Here, the problem is that the government doesn't have access to this vast pool of volunteer geographical resources that are interested in contributing data, among other things. And now Maggie is really the conduit, OSM is the conduit between the volunteer geographic community and the US government, which could use more of this real-time mapping and specialty mapping.
So can I build on that? I had a question, maybe it builds on Eddie's. So how much do you influence where the data is collected as the leadership at OSM versus what the volunteers are doing? Can you guide them to gap areas or like Eddie was saying, to support specific either areas or government agencies somewhere?
Yes. So there's a few organizations that do this more so than OpenStreetMap US. This is something new that we're trying out. I would like to, identify undermapped areas of the United States, find areas that haven't been touched in a while. And we have a tool called the Tasking Manager. And with that, you can create a project and say, you know what, we're going to map Southern Louisiana before there's a storm. So we know where all those emergency exits are. Where are those roads? Where are the buildings? And let's focus our mapping there. Or, none of the buildings in West Texas are mapped. Let's map there. So one of the tools we use to start targeted mapping campaigns is something called the Tasking Manager. There's a group called Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team that does these mapping campaigns. And I would say they probably do the most targeted mapping, particularly around natural disasters. So, the Nepal earthquake, they mobilize volunteers to work on these certain tasks. And there's, the mappers who add the data, then there's the people who go in and validate the data, and that data gets to the Red Cross and all those emergency responders. So they really, is there someone here from that group who wants to talk about it more? Anybody from HOT? Dan, you work with HOT with the Red Cross. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, they just recently got a huge grant to massively expand their work, and they, I think, are focusing a lot on building local communities around the world and empowering the communities to really own the map in their areas and contribute. And it's evolved a lot from kind of when it was more focused on just the armchair remote mapping. Yeah, just, making that data available for everybody, whether it's, civil society, humanitarians responding to disasters, for people creating businesses.
Thanks. Sorry to put you on the spot. You were right below me. It's like just too easy. So Nadine, to answer your question, yes, there is a way. But other mappers prefer, you know, I like the term that people use, map gardener. So, you know, out here in Richmond, if something changes, I want to add it to the map. If I notice that the playground behind me takes out a swing, like I would like to update that. So some people are really great at keeping their local communities up to date. And a lot of people take pride in it. And, you know, the thing that I love about this community is it seems that people really want to build something more than tear it down. Because, you know, there's always the question of, you know, vandalism and this and that, but really it's kind of that, as you know, with open, the more open you are, it can also be more difficult to do those kind of things. Other questions, comments? Yes, Chauncey. Send me an email. Let me talk to you about it.
Does anybody else have a question for Maggie?
I'll ask another question because I've seen on Twitter recently a lot of like Google Maps versus Apple Maps versus OSM. So can you maybe elaborate on the relationship? So Google Maps actually uses OSM maps in the background, or back and forth? I don't know.
We don't have much of a relationship with Google Maps. I mean, everything you put into Google Maps belongs to Google Maps. So if they were to use OpenStreetMap data, it would go against our license. So they cannot use OpenStreetMap data unless they make it publicly available to people through the ODBL license.
So, but do they validate maybe or something because it's an open? We don't know, because it's a good validation tool at the same time. That's why I said just wondering.
There's been some things in the past where, I don't know, I go down this road, but it's not legal for them to use OpenStreetMap without attributing it or making the data publicly available. So,
well, there was a major change. How many years ago was it from the previous license? Was it a Creative Commons license to ODBL? Mm-hmm. And I recall that was a painful process for the community. A lot of data had to be dropped because it wasn't compliant or things like that. But now there seems to be general satisfaction with the ODBL license.
I mean, as everyone knows, in a consensus-based community, it can be difficult to make everyone happy. But even that process, if every edit belongs to the mapper who added it. So you have to get people's permission to change a license on the data that they added. So it was a very long process to change that license.
Are there any other questions for Maggie?
Hey, Maggie. Hi, I have a quick question for you. I know this is probably something I can go onto the website and find out, but how do you deal with conflicts as far as, you know, say I map my street out here in, you know, and call it something, and somebody maps it and calls it something else or has another name for it or whatever, any kind of conflict like that. How do they deal with that at OpenStreetMap?
You're describing an edit war. It does happen. You know, in my role, have never been a part of that. The foundation has a few working groups. There's a data working group, and actually there's a forum for making complaints if someone is making bad edits on purpose. For the most part, if you have a bad edit, it's a new mapper and they're learning how to map, and you know, you try to reach out to them and say, hey, maybe try mapping this way, or you know, any mapper can contact another mapper. When you go into OpenStreetMap, you can hit the history button and you can see all of the change sets that were recently updated and the mapper who added them. So there's ways to communicate with that person down the street who might not know that it just got renamed Magnolia Lane, but you know, you can. So the general tone there is to assume the best, and that especially in a global community, that can avoid a lot of conflict.
Maggie, can I ask you a question, please? Do you get quite? I mean, we've seen the growing emergence of smart cities. Do you get an awful lot more community planners and town planners and that sort of thing? Are you seeing that sort of wave coming in now that we are seeing sort of more than anybody else? What's the sort of trend, I guess, in more of a more general question? What's the trend that you're seeing now coming in? And do you?
I mean, I've said this for the last year, so I feel like the next big wave is that government at the different levels. So that's where I've been focusing a lot of my attention. I also think it's very valuable in educational settings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a while. Sorry.
Do you see waves of data come in? Do you see waves of contribution from different areas? Do you see like a tsunami from education, or do you see this coming from different, as different people become more aware of it?
I mean, you saw the chart that I showed over the last 3 years of those corporate edits, I think has been the biggest wave of change within the community. Really starting to increase those contributions from Microsoft and Facebook and other large corporations who are now this is part of their business plan, right? So they're not relying on any other proprietary data. They need OpenStreetMap. They're a year from there. Is it still being recorded? So I think that's a big change, is that it's being taken way more seriously. It's a contender in the field now.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Fawaz, do you have a question? And then I think I'll stop putting Maggie on the spot for much longer, although she's being wonderful and entertaining all our curiosity. So Fawaz?
Yeah, hi there. Thank you, Maggie, for the information shared. I have two questions. And the first question is, normally after the construction that's happening on the roads or like building a new highways, on the day when it's completed, how long does it generally take to get the Google Maps updated and it displays on the Google Map, the new roads, new bridges, stuff like that? And my second question was, usually most of us, carry GPS, Garmin GPS devices in our car, because I prefer to use that because sometimes I operate cell phone, for different purpose. But there is a situation here that you have to, like, for instance, after 2 years or 3 years, you have to, repay for the service and, repay for the entire, to get the update of the transportations and, new road networks in the Garmin device, in the Garmin GPS. So instead of, paying for the extra, $70 or whatever, how can we get it for free, something like that for Garmin GPS, or, so it's like every year, if there's new construction, new buildings, it gets up to date every year. So those are two questions. I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the questions. I would say I have no idea how often Google updates their data, and I would suggest using OpenStreetMap. As far as the Garmin data as well, there are lots of different apps out there now that rely on OpenStreetMap data rather than the proprietary options. So OSM and Maps.me, there are navigation apps out there now that update as often as OpenStreetMap updates. So lane restrictions, turn restrictions, all those things. So if you continue to use Google and Garmin, I don't know what the answer is there.
All right.
But OpenStreetMap, it can be updated in a matter of minutes.
So can we, like, for instance, connect Garmin device with our computer and just download the new data, open data for free? Would that work? Or is it something like that, or no?
I use my phone, so I don't know. Does anybody use Garmin and OpenStreetMap out there?
I don't know. Yeah, that's the thing. That's
kind of a competitor.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Maggie. for volunteering your time with us tonight and sharing more about OpenStreetMap and OpenStreetMap US, and the history of OpenStreetMap,